Welcome, everyone. I'm here today with Esther, Chrissie, Marshall, and Savannah. Today, we're going to talk about holding standards slash boundaries in whatever way that we want to interpret that. Very important topic. This is part of our human science kind of topics that we're doing instead of just talking about investment, landing pages, M&A all the time, which we are going to keep talking about. We're also going to do some of these human science type of topics. So I will go with a little bit of the concept and an example to start, and then each of everyone else will kind of do 60, 90 seconds as well. So at a high level, one of the examples for me would be when someone is late to a call, 5 minutes late, whatever. And usually I put a 3 minute timer where it's like 2 or 3 minutes and I hop off the call, right? So if somebody's late to a call or if somebody no shows for a call, I have a protocol, and a lot of the people I work with, we have a protocol where we end the relationship. If somebody, and this is a firm, high standard, high boundary we are holding in the world, where if somebody's going to no show, that's an opportunity cost on all of our time. And it's a disrespect for the other human on the call. For me, for example, I have 70 plus calls a week. If everybody cancels, in theory, that's 140 calls. It's not scalable. When I hold a slot on a calendar for somebody, this isn't me being special. This is just everybody being respectful of everybody's time. If I hold a spot, that's opportunity cost of another slot, right? So people that think it's acceptable and normal to cancel meetings and just not show up and then later say, oh, sorry, is not acceptable in holding standards and boundaries that I hold. And then also being late as well. If you're 5 minutes late on 15-minute meetings, like I do 15 minutes, that's 2/3 of the meeting gone. And even if you are doing the standard like 30 and 60-minute meetings, like most of the companies in the world, and not everybody's doing rapid pace 15-minute meetings like me and our team, still that is 5 minutes where people are sitting around waiting. They can't get started necessarily without having to restart when somebody starts. So holding boundaries means when somebody does press up on a boundary, that you bring it up with them and say, hey, I'm not aligned. I mean, we're not going to hate. We're not going to say like this is not right for you to do, but we're going to say in our value system and for our consented aligned relationship, I'm not aligned for this. What do you think about this? Let's proceed forward differently, or let's separate. So that's how we kind of like address that, and that's my high level thoughts. Chrissy, what are your thoughts on holding standards and boundaries?
So, Jeremy, I think for me, holding standards and boundaries is really one of the most important ways that we can remain authentic and true to ourselves. Because when we hold those standards and boundaries, it means that we actually know who we are. And it's communicating to others that we know our value and our worth and that those are a priority for us. So this ends up setting the stage for how other people will treat us. And then when we do that, that ends up opening the door, in my opinion, to better relationships and interactions. So it ends up, you get clearer communication, so less misunderstandings. You get more productive interactions with others. It also provides us, I think, with a sense of safety and control in this situation because we're being clear what we want, what we don't want. So it mitigates stress. And then I think one of the most important things for me, at least in standards and boundaries, is that they provide us with a structure for decision making that's in alignment with who we are. So it moves us out of this passive role in life where we're letting things happen to us into a role of aligned action where we're really clear on what we want, what we don't want, and what we need to get there.
I love it. I love it. Let's do Marshall, and because I know he has to go earlier. Marshall, what are your thoughts on this?
Man, I like to think about boundaries and understanding them, and I use these metaphors often, vehicles, cars, but let's look at the rules of the road. You have your solid lines, your dotted lines to know when to pass. You have your traffic signals to, go, stop, slow down, which I really like the yellow light because I think the yellow light is a strong, reference point for that gradient between go and no go as it relates to even establishing boundaries. I think a lot of times people think it's either like go, stop. Then there's this little gradient right in there where it's like, I'll give you a moment, slow down, take a second to look at this. And, you have these opportunities to set your terms and conditions. All of these things that are on the highways and byways are there for us to, get to where we're going smoothly. Now, of course, when we're driving, it's not always like that. As you can see on any highway, rubbernecking by an accident, but also just kind of the defensive driving of seeing that other people don't always follow the rules of the road the way that, they've been laid out and written. And so with that in mind, even having this conversation, most people don't discuss the conversation of having boundaries. What are the terms and conditions for me interacting? And usually, we might kind of succumb to the terms and conditions of wherever we are, but we can kind of come to a place where we understand, well, where is my line? Where do I need to speak up about my line? Because, just like somebody else flip a signal and not give the turn signal before they go, cut you off. This can happen. If you're not paying attention, you crash. If you're paying attention, you may not. And these kind of things do happen relationally as well. Being aware of one, that we're on the road, that we're going somewhere. Two, that we can recognize that there are rules to the road, but people may not always recognize them. And three, taking that into consideration, becoming very clear about what that means for you so that you can establish those boundaries clearly, know when they're being intercepted, and know what to do about it.
I love it. I love it. Very well said. Esther, what are your thoughts?
Awesome, Marshall. I'm glad you mentioned awareness because that's kind of where my head went too. I think often of the fact that not every day looks the same. Like your best does not look the same every day. And it's better in the long term not to overload yourself too much because we all know that leads to burnout, especially in the business sense. So knowing not only what your boundary is normally on a normal day, but what is your boundary on a day where maybe, you didn't get much sleep. It's going to look probably a little lower and people won't know that intuitively. You're going to have to communicate that to a certain degree. And I think we do that really well in maybe like our professional life of like, hey, didn't sleep that much. Sorry, won't be on our game. But there's certain areas of our life where maybe we're not as outspoken about why or whether we're at a certain level to kind of meet the other person's expectation and also set the expectation of the day to not burn out. So those are my thoughts regarding like boundaries and becoming aware of your own, but also letting other people know about them because they're not inside of us, they're outside of us, and they have their own ideas, like Marshall said, of what the road means and what it looks like and what they're supposed to do on it.
I love it. I love it. Savannah.
Yeah, absolutely. Segueing off of that, just I think communication in general is the most important thing to me on this topic, is because if you don't communicate your needs and communicate with others about what their needs are, you cannot properly set boundaries. And that goes in terms of like interviews, like what you expect out of interviews of candidates, or what you expect out of you and your team, like the standards of your team in general. And I think talking about it as early on as you can as well is super important, because if 3 minutes into a meeting, if you're going to hop off, you've got to let people know that like that's your boundary and that's your hard line. Because I do have that boundary as well, and I've communicated with people in so many different ways of the reasons why like I think it's important, because that's also a hard part about communicating it too, is you have to communicate why you think that it's important, to show that you care about those people and that you care about their boundaries as well, because there's such a layer of respect on top of this as well. Because if you know your own boundaries, and I think someone earlier had said that like you have to really know yourself really well too, and be really introspective of what your needs are, what the other people across the table from you, what their needs are, so that everyone feels well respected and everyone's time is well respected, if that makes sense. But yeah, in general, just holding those boundaries is respectful to yourself, but also respectful to communicate with others about what their needs are.
I love it. Perfectly said. Perfect to end this. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming to chat.